Happy Monday, everyone. Here's a look at the U.S. weather outlook, not just for this week, but next week. I'm going to talk about three storm systems impacting the U.S. this week and going to kind of start off with where we've been. A lot of talk has been about the significant winter weather and cold conditions across the east, very dry and warm conditions across the west. And we're going to be seeing sort of a reversal of that as we go into a more zonal flow with a more consistent stream of storm systems for much of the western U.S. That's going to moderate temperatures for a lot of the eastern U.S. as well. So somewhat more typical winter weather conditions this week and into next week. Right now, the snowpack across much of the western U.S. is in pretty bad shape. A lot of areas are 50% of less of where they should be for this time of year. The exceptions have been really the higher you go up in elevation, the better the snowfall has been. The snow line where that transition from rain to snow happens has just been rather high across much of the West this year, with just a lot of the storm systems being pretty warm when they have had moisture. Some parts of the Sierra Nevadas are doing a little better, parts of the central and northern Rockies, but really areas that have been doing really well have not been seeing much snow, and that's kind of moderating. There is, as I mentioned, the first storm system impacting the U.S. that is bringing some needed snow to parts of Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming today and into early tomorrow. But even if we look at some of these specific stations, this is one in Washington here. A lot of sites don't really hit their peak snowpack until we get into early to mid-March. It really depends upon the location and elevation. Just as I was looking through some analogs of years that have seen similar really poor starts, at least here in Washington, we did see a pretty significant reversal back in, this is the winter of 2014. So this would be 2013 into 2014. We saw really poor conditions through much of the month that really turned the page back in February and got us back to near average conditions by March. So not saying that's going to happen. There are some indications that this pattern will hold for a few weeks to bring some much needed precipitation to the west. And part of that, and also just something to call out too, is we've been in sort of weak La Nina conditions. It hasn't seen much of an impact really to the western U.S. like we typically expect with La Nina, but we're just about into neutral conditions. And the outlook from the Climate Prediction Center, and also supported by a lot of forecast model guidance, is that the cooler waters across the eastern equatorial Pacific are beginning to already moderate out as you look into some of the deeper depths. And what that means is that La Nina conditions likely become more neutral really within the coming weeks to months here, and probably remaining neutral. And it's beginning to look more likely than not that we actually go into an El Nino pattern that is warmer than average temperatures across the eastern equatorial Pacific as we head into this summer and into next fall. So perhaps um, a piece of information, a controlling mechanism for next winter as we look ahead. The other thing, too, that I wanted to call out, we've seen very dry conditions even across parts of the plain states as well. We've seen some fire weather conditions and concerns across really a lot of the high plains from western Texas up through eastern Colorado and Wyoming. And also wanted to call out, NOAA just released a really great toolkit for those that have critical fire weather operations. NOAA's Wildland Fire Data Portal recently was released. They have a map version, but they also have an API that you can pull. Pretty cool tool. So we're looking, the Storm Prediction Center, which does the daily fire weather outlooks, has critical conditions for parts of the high plains here across western Nebraska and parts of Colorado, and then again into eastern New Mexico and Texas Panhandle. And it also shows hotspots and could kind of classify and give some information about those. We actually, within the last hour, saw vegetation fires start near one of the lake beds in the northwest side of Amarillo, another one out here, a little more intensity out across eastern New Mexico. So we unfortunately are seeing some ignited wildfires out here, a lot of other prescribed burns and things like that. Really cool tool. Wanted to share that. And as I mentioned before, we're sort of shifting this pattern. We've really been talking about a lot of the polar vortex, a lot of the energy that is sort of the displacement of the polar vortex itself into parts of the United States and North America. And really the way we can look at that is the Arctic Oscillation, which just says how displaced the winds are or how the pressure tendencies are displaced. And really, when it goes negative, that means that the polar jet stream is very wobbly or very more unstable. So that sort of allowed for some of that intrusion of really cold air into the eastern U.S. We've seen very negative Arctic oscillation values. Forecast values take it back to more moderate value or even positive as we go out into the next couple of weeks. So that in part is going to explain the reversal that we're seeing in conditions. And this sort of looks into next week and beyond. The Climate Prediction Center is really showing much more than likely above average temperatures for much of the U.S. Into next week, even parts of the eastern U.S., but we'll see sort of cooler than average conditions across the West. Not overly cold conditions, but when we have more cloud cover, more rain with these storm systems, it will be cooler, especially compared to what it's been the past month. And then we can also expect above average precipitation really across the much of the U.S., especially the West, parts of the northern plains, Midwest, and even the Southeast, which will be some much needed rain. It looks like, unfortunately, not a lot of rain for parts of the high plains that are already really dry. So, as we look at the forecast, I mentioned three storm systems. There's kind of a 1-2 combo. One shortwave trough here across southern Canada that's going to merge with this trough coming across the interior west. As I mentioned, that's bringing some much needed snow across Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming today and into early tomorrow. As this shifts, a few things are going to happen. These are going to sort of phase together. This storm system, this closed low, which is very far south, is going to more or less dissipate, but it is going to help to bring up some moisture. And a cold front that gets pushed further south from the storm system. This moisture is going to help bring some rain across parts of the central and southeast U.S. And then we'll see snow again across the interior west, and then we'll see snow manifest across parts of the Northeast and Great Lakes. And in New England as well tomorrow, and then into Wednesday as well. That's kind of storm system one, as that all transitions off. And then we begin to watch another trough, pretty deep trough coming into California. This is a fairly broad trough. It's not overly strong. There is enough moisture, but not a ton of moisture. And this is sort of what we really need. When we saw moisture in storm systems December through early January, we saw these really intense atmospheric rivers, a ton of moisture transport that led to a lot of flooding. This is really what we need, sort of more frequent, low intensity storm systems. So this isn't really an atmospheric river per se, but it is going to bring moisture into California, much needed snow for the Sierra Nevadas, and that's going to extend up into portions of the Four Corners and northern Rockies as well as we go into later this week. And then there's a kind of a series of shortwave troughs that sort of dig this broader trough, and that lifts out into the southern plains as we head into this weekend. That's going to do a few things. In addition to the snow, much needed snowfall for the Southwest, it's going to bring perhaps it's going to bring some rain, perhaps some severe weather. We'll kind of keep an eye on that. Doesn't look overly severe, but chance for a few strong storms across the Gulf Coast states this weekend. And then it's also going to bring some of that moisture and enough remaining cold air to bring some potential snow, maybe some areas of freezing rain, nothing like what we just saw with Winter Storm Fern, but some wintry precipitation into the mid-Atlantic and Northeast into this weekend. And then while that's happening, another slightly stronger storm system comes into the Pacific Northwest and into Oregon there. And that really is going to be sort of followed by a sequence of storms that's really going to highlight the weather for next week. So precipitation, not only for California, but really Pacific Northwest and a lot of the West, mid to late week. And it looks like that's going to continue into early next week. In terms of, what does this look like in terms of precipitation type? As I mentioned before, we're looking at snow across parts of the interior west, western plains, and then that expands into the Northeast, New England tomorrow, rain along that cold front. Next storm system coming into California. As that kicks out, we'll see rain, perhaps a few strong storms. On the heels of that, rain and snow for the western U.S. into this weekend. And then we see continued active conditions into next week. In terms of, what is the severity of the winter weather conditions? This is what is the probability of moderate conditions, moderate snow impacts. It looks like probably not even moderate, probably just minor impacts from snow across the western plains into the Northeast over the next 24 hours. Some more impacts, heavier snow into parts of the Sierra Nevadas. And then as we head later into this weekend, this weekend, that second storm system, that's going to bring some snow, perhaps some light to moderate freezing rain for parts of the Appalachians this weekend. But again, this is just sort of the start of everything that remains more active into next week.